Doctor, you've talked about a couple different treatments, and you mentioned coffee enemas. What is it about those that produce the results? How do they work?
Well, the liver is the body's main detoxification organ. That's where environmental chemicals, our own metabolic waste, drugs, toxic chemicals that we take in are neutralized and processed. Now, oddly enough, when you drink coffee, it tends to suppress liver function. It stimulates certain nerves called the sympathetic nerves. When they're turned on by coffee, when you drink it, you become alert. That's the stress nervous system. That's why you become alert. But when the sympathetic system is active, it suppresses liver function. However, when you take coffee rectally as an enema, it stimulates a completely different set of nerves called the sacral parasympathetic nerves, to get technical, located in the lower colon. When those nerves are turned on by caffeine through a reflex, they stimulate the liver through a reflex to release all its toxins, and it also enhances liver detoxification processes. Nothing helps the liver clean out faster, more efficiently, in our experience, more effective than coffee enemas. And interestingly enough, again, we get criticized for coffee enemas because it sounds like a peculiar thing. In fact, when I met Kelly, it sounded peculiar to me. It was being trained by Robert Good, president of Sloan County. I didn't know anything about enemas. But I started going through the medical literature, as Kelly suggested, and lo and behold, I found dozens and dozens of studies from the conventional medical literature showing how effective they were. I have a study from Uruguay from about 1943, where a group of physicians in Uruguay published in a South American journal, it was a peer-reviewed journal, found that with septic shock, which was 50% mortality rate, that's when people have really bad infections and they have to be hospitalized in today intensive care units. In those days, more than 50% of people would die with that. They would get almost 100% reduced mortality by using coffee enemas, and they thought it was stimulating the liver. I have an article from the 1922 New England Journal, our esteemed medical journal, where a group at a Harvard teaching hospital were using enemas to treat what we call today bipolar illness. In those days, they called manic depression. Successfully, they're getting these patients out of the institutions off medication by using enemas. It's in the medical literature. One of Kelly's great frustrations, he said, I get criticized for using enemas. It's a joke. It's weird. I learned about them right from the medical literature. So I don't believe anybody having been trained as a journalist. So I went to the medical literature, and lo and behold, dozens of articles. I have them in files in my office. And, some of them are old, but just because they're old doesn't mean they're not valid. And the really interesting studies from major institutions like Harvard. This Uruguayan study was really fascinating, where they reversed septic shock, and no one ever read it except me and 6 other people. But they're really very effective, and they were doctors who used them. This is before we got too highfalutin technological, where people would look to anything they could use. So they seem to help the liver work better. Kelly believed when the liver works better, everything else works better. And there's some truth to that, because as the body repairs and as tumors break down, as I said, you get all this toxic waste, and patients can get real sick unless you get the liver to efficiently mobilize that waste. And coffee enemas seem to help.